Cảm thế thì làm sao nhỉ? Thỉnh thoảng nó lại bị xèn cái to. Thỉnh thoảng nó bị xèn một cái. À thế à?
Đúng rồi. Gập xuống là nó sẽ mất mạng. Xuống lên đây đi.
Vâng đây. Đây em đang định để anh ấy dừng đây xong rồi sẽ thử.
Nhìn được chưa? Một được chưa? Em không nhìn quan sát được. Cái này thôi đúng không? Không sao nữa mình xuống.
Hay là
một cuộn này hình như 3 mấy nhỉ?
sợ không hay chạm nhầm mình không sâu.
Alo. 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 Anh alo nói không ra hội trường này.
Đẩy lên.
Alo. Alo. Đây. Thưa anh nói mic từ.
Trên Zoom không ra hội trường đâu. Khi nào mà có người trên Zoom phát biểu họ giơ tay ấy, phát biểu thì lúc đấy bảo lên âm thanh họ chỉnh mic lên thì nó mới lên ạ.
Vâng vâng. Alo. Alo.
Em làm việc cùng thanh toán rất là xuất sắc. Và không phải một thanh toán đâu anh ạ. Em là được dược em là nước. Em Hồng Dung. Em xin phép được.
Em lên ngay máy qua trang đăng ký luôn.
Vâng. Anh yên tâm đi, em sẽ đeo một anh từ giờ em về hưu. Từ giờ em về hưu, đúng rồi, tại vì em sẽ về hưu trước anh.
Sau này em đến trước em được.
Tại vì em sinh năm 17 nên là bọn em cũng sẽ về hưu sớm hơn anh chẳng. Đúng rồi.
Anh làm đúng 5 năm em nghỉ. Em làm sau 5 năm em nghỉ.
Tại vì sao em làm người kia là
từ 4 giờ 5 giờ đây phải bằng cái lịch kiểm tra đảng ủy cái lịch kín không là có 400 nhóm.
Ladies and gentlemen, the IMF paper launching ceremony will begin in a few minutes, and we would like to invite you all to enter the main hall and be seated. Thank you very much. On the agenda page, you can find two QR codes. One is for the material, and the other one is for the link Zoom, so that you can get engaged in the whole event with us. The whole program would be in English. So you can choose to listen to either English or Vietnamese thanks to the translation support provided in the QR code. Thank you very much.
Không giữ được đâu, không giữ được.
Kính thưa quý vị đại biểu quan khách, thay mặt ban tổ chức, tôi xin trân trọng kính mời các quý vị đại biểu khách quý thầy cô, chúng ta di chuyển lên những hàng ghế phía trên để cho hội trường chúng ta có thể có được những khuôn hình đẹp nhất cho chương trình ngày hôm nay. Toàn bộ chương trình ngày hôm nay sẽ được diễn ra bằng tiếng Anh. Ở trên tay của quý vị đã có mã QR code để có thể truy cập được vào đường link Zoom, và trên đó thì quý vị có thể lựa chọn nghe bằng tiếng Anh hoặc tiếng Việt với sự hỗ trợ của phiên dịch. Xin trân trọng cảm ơn. Ladies and gentlemen, the IMF paper launch will begin in 2 minutes. We would like to invite you all to move to the main hall and be seated. We would appreciate if you could kindly switch off your mobile phones to the silent mode during the program. Thank you for your cooperation. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, on behalf of the Organizing Board at National Economics University, I'd like to express our great honor to welcome the visit by Ms. Antoinette Sayeh, the IMF Deputy Managing Director, as well as the delegates from the IMF, World Bank, and other relevant authorities to National Economics University. Ladies and gentlemen, as we know, the pandemic COVID-19 has caused serious injuries to the global economy. In Asia, both advanced and developing countries have experienced extreme weakness in productivity growth. This raises the alarming requirement for the appropriate solution in order to minimize economic scaling and to promote long-term growth in the post-COVID-19 period. And there is no other more appropriate response rather than the innovation, which has always been regarded as the key force for increasing economic prosperity and improving living standards. We've got lots of funding invested into the research and developments and hundreds of ideas and patents. However, the key point is how to integrate the innovation into the productivity growth, especially with the participation and the integration of digitalization due to the Industrial Revolution. And under that context, the paper carried out by the IMF aims to raise the awareness about how the relationship between innovation and digitalization can help in promoting productivity in both advanced and developing Asia economies, and to put emphasis on crucial mechanisms and policies for the growth based on the innovation. And today, on the occasion of the visit by Ms. Antoinette Sayeh, the IMF Deputy Managing Director, the IMF, in collaboration with National Economics University, officially organizes the launch of the IMF paper, Accelerating Innovation and Digitalization in Asia to Boost Productivity. Attending the event today, on behalf of the Organizing Board, I'd like to introduce Ms. Antoinette Sayeh, the Deputy Managing Director, IMF. Ms. Caroline Thok, the World Bank Country Director for Vietnam. Mr. Vũ Quốc Huy, Director of National Innovation Center, Ministry of Planning and Investment. Mr. Nguyễn Ánh Dương, Head of Research Department, Central Institute for Economics Management. Mr. Hoàng Nam Tiến, FPT Telecom Chairman. Associate Professor Dr. Nguyễn Văn Thành, Lieutenant General, Central Council of Theoretical Studies. And from National Economics University, Associate Professor Dr. Bùi Đức Thọ, University Chairman. Professor Dr. Phạm Hồng Trương, President. Associate Professor Dr. Bùi Huy Nhượng, Vice President. Professor Dr. Trần Thọ Đạt, member of Central Council of Theoretical Studies. Professor Dr. Trần Thị Vân Hoa, member of Central Council of Theoretical Studies. And we'd like to show our gratitude for the participation of representatives from a diversity of relevant authorities, including World Bank, the Asia Development Bank, the UNIDO, the SECO, the US Embassy, Singapore Embassy in Vietnam, as well as the Institute, the Central Economics Commission, the Assembly Economics Commission, the State Bank, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning and Investment, the Central Institute for Economic Management, Vietnam Economics Institutes, and other universities. We also highly appreciate the attendance of the press and the mass media to broadcast this event. And this program is being live streamed on the official Facebook page of National Economics University. We also provide with the QR code for material supply and the link Zoom access with translation support. Once again, warmly welcome all the distinguished guests and the delegates to the launching event of the IMF paper at National Economics University. And now on behalf of the organizing board, I'd like to invite Professor Dr. Phạm Hồng Trương, President, National Economics University, to deliver the opening remark. Please welcome.
Good morning, distinguished guests, Ms. Anthony Sayes, Deputy Managing Director, IMF, Mr. Vũ Cu Huy, Director of National Innovation Center, NDI, Ms. Carola Tuck, World Bank Country Director for Vietnam, Mr. Hoàng Nam Tiến, FT Telecom Chairman, Associate Professor Bùi Đức Thọ, Chairman of the University, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, on behalf of National Economics University, I would like to welcome all of you to our very important event today, the launching of IMF paper. We are living in the knowledge economy in which science, technology, and information are considered as the mainstream of production to create wealth for society. In that economy, the university has the mission of being placed to provide scientific and technology knowledge, a place to create, develop, and spread knowledge and transfer them into real life. The university has the responsibility of training and creating human resources for the process of development in society. Experience in developed countries show that most significant technological innovation originates in universities. We are transferred through knowledge sharing, research, and development activities. Therefore, the role of higher education institution cannot be denied for science, technology, and innovation. Today, as an innovation hub, our university, in collaboration with IMF, officially organized the launch of the IMF paper, Accelerating Innovation and Digitalization in Asia to Boost Productivity. The report has some main objectives, including examine the landscape of innovation in the region, use firm-level data for advanced and developing Asia to investigate the role of innovation and digitalization for productivity growth and its dispersion across firms, and to identify factors that impact innovation for country and firm close to the technological frontier, and technological diffusion for country and firm are farther from frontier. And third, discusses policy instruments that can be used to close innovation and productivity gap and push aggregate productivity. This report will have understand how innovation and digitalization can boost productivity in advanced and developing Asia, and highlight mechanisms and policies need for innovation-led growth. We would like to show our gratitude for the participation of representatives of IMF, World Bank, Asia Development Bank, Embassy in Vietnam, as well as many central authorities, institutes, and universities in this event. We are also looking forward to have further research collaboration with international organizations in the future. I do believe that launch of IMF report accelerating innovation and digitalization in Asia to push productivity will be successful. Thank you very much and have a good time.
Thank you very much, the President. Ladies and gentlemen, and for the next section with a panel discussion among the experts and the presentation about the IMF paper, I'd like to introduce and welcome to the stage the moderator, Mr. Nguyễn Ánh Dương, Head of Research Department, Central Institute for Economics Management. And I'd like to draw your attention to welcome to the stage the experts for the panel discussion, Mr. Vũ Quốc Huy, Director, National Innovation Center, Ms. Anthony Sayer, the IMF Deputy Managing Director, Professor Dr. Phạm Hồng Trương, President, National Economics University, Ms. Carrie Tak, World Bank Director for Vietnam, Mr. Hoàng Nam Tiến, FPT Telecom Chairman. Please welcome.
Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored to facilitate today's event. In the agenda, we have the list of items over there. So without further ado, I will start the items. Next, I'm very honored to invite Ms. Antoinette Sayer, Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, to introduce the main theme for discussion today. Ms. Sayer, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much for that introduction. A very good morning to everyone. Let me start by thanking President Chung very much for hosting us this morning. We're really grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with the university in presenting this paper. And let me, of course, thank all students here today, all partners as well, for joining us. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion of this paper, which I think is very timely. The topic is particularly important today as the gloomier global outlook could worsen the slowdown in productivity that we've observed for many years and pose threats to living standards. So no better time to sink our teeth into this issue than now. No better place to do so but a university, as President Chung also underscored. So today, the world economy struggles with crisis upon crisis, from the COVID pandemic to the effects of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the cost of living crisis with surging inflation. But it is important to not lose sight of longer-term issues that will determine tomorrow's living standards. That is our capacity to maintain healthy productivity growth. And this is where we see digitalization and innovation playing a critical role. So the IMF paper begins by providing a landscape of innovation in Asia and finds that in recent decades, the region has become a global innovation powerhouse. And for example, the region accounts for more than half of world's patents. Importantly, this innovative dynamism is observed both in countries at the technological frontier and in non-frontier developing countries like Vietnam. And the surge in innovation in recent years has been related to the boom in digital technologies, an area where Asian countries have a leading role. In fact, what we observe is that many firms use the COVID-19 shock as a catalyst to increase their digitalization and to automate processes. And this is critical as going forward, business models and the working environment are likely to be different from pre-COVID times. Despite Asia's success in digitalization and innovation, though, there are still significant gaps that prevent the region from fully reaping the benefit of innovation. And this is equally the case in Vietnam. In fact, the recent progress in innovation and digitalization in the region has not supported strong productivity growth. In fact, productivity growth has been rather weak. And this apparent dichotomy points to the need to incentivize not only innovation per se, but also the diffusion of technology to expand the usage of new technologies to a broader set of firms. It also points to the urgent need to close digital gaps across sectors, across firms, and across workers. So I very much look forward to our discussion, a very productive one, I hope, this morning on how best countries in the region, and Vietnam in particular, can capitalize on growth opportunities from the digital transformation. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sae. Before we start the panel discussion, which I believe will be very enlightening and insightful, I'm very pleased now to invite Dr. Era Dablan-Norris to the podium. She will have a brief presentation on the report that is launched today about accelerating innovation and digitalization in Asia to boost productivity. Dr. Dablan-Norris, the floor is yours.
We're just waiting. Thank you very much. Good morning to all. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Era Dablan-Norris. I am one of the co-authors of this paper. I am also the IMF's mission chief to Vietnam. Before I begin with my short presentation, I really wanted to thank the National Economics University for hosting us this morning. So the motivation for our paper comes from the fact that total factor productivity, or TFP, which captures the ability to create more outputs than this, with the same inputs, was on a declining trend in Asian countries, as was mentioned by DMD Sahe, even prior to the pandemic. And we can see this from the left-hand side figure. Even in Vietnam, despite very rapid and sustained economic growth in recent years, total factor productivity has been lagging other countries in the region. At the same time, we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has opened up deep economic scars for many Asian countries. And these trends are of concern because productivity is one of the key drivers of long-term growth prospects for countries. So to fix our ideas on how innovation and digitalization can play an important role in stimulating productivity growth and boosting long-term economic prospects of a country, this slide shows a very simple schematic. Within firm, productivity growth occurs as a result of innovation by leading firms and the adoption of better existing technologies and management practices by lagging firms. Technology adoption can also result in a beneficial or more efficient reallocation of resources across firms. In turn, innovation and technology adoption require investments in both physical capital, human capital, in research and development, and one of the key focuses of our discussion today in digital tools and infrastructure. So let me very briefly walk you through the landscape of innovation and digitalization in Asia. As was mentioned earlier, Asia has really emerged as an innovation powerhouse in recent decades, particularly when it comes to applied research as measured by patents. Before the pandemic, the region accounted for, contributed to more than 60% of world patents, particularly in digital communication and computer technologies. And the lion's share of these patents in Asia are accounted for a small group of countries, notably China, Korea, and Japan. But even in emerging and developing Asia, we see that countries like Vietnam have, while they don't actively engage intensively in research and development activities, they've benefited significantly from international technology diffusion. As can be seen from the left-hand side figure, high-tech imports in countries like Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, and Thailand are much higher than the world median. And this is really on account of very strong trade linkages, FDI linkages, and participation in global value chains. At the same time, as can be seen on the right-hand side chart, since 2013, emerging and developing Asian countries are accounting for an increasing share of patents that are granted to non-residents or foreign firms. There's a number of forces that have enhanced firms' capacity for technology adoption in countries like Vietnam. First, it's improvements in the quality of human capital. And here, universities clearly have a very, very important role to play. For instance, as seen on the left-hand side figure, the tertiary school enrollment rate in Vietnam and Malaysia has increased by more than 10 percentage points in the last 2 decades. Secondly, we also see that digital infrastructure has been significantly enhanced in emerging and developing Asia, and is captured by the number of secure internet service, which now is converging to higher income status. And here, Vietnam's success is particularly noteworthy. When it comes to digitalization, we see that the region's successes are manifest in a number of different ways. For instance, about 2/3 of the world's industrial robots are employed in Asia. Similarly, Asia now accounts for around 60%, nearly 60% of the world's online retail sales, a trend that was actually accelerated by the pandemic. So as can be seen from the right-hand side figure, e-commerce revenues grew by 40 to 60% in Vietnam, in Singapore, and in Indonesia in 2020, outpacing most of the world. So given these successes, why isn't this innovation aggregate productivity link working well in Asia? In our paper, we touch upon a number of factors, And just very briefly, one of the factors among many has to do with the quality and impact of research and development that is already taking place in Asia. For instance, as shown in the left-hand side figure, patents, the number of patents per researcher, which is really a proxy for how productive research and development actually is, this has actually been stagnant or declining. So while there's a lot of innovation is measured by patents taking place, patent citations or the productivity of the research and development has been lagging. Second, we see that there's been a growing concentration of research and development activities in a few firms. So in other words, what we're seeing is that there's a growing dispersion between research and development activities in a handful of firms relative to the mass of other firms in the economy. Now we also see that there is a growing dispersion in the productivity of firms within Asia. So as seen in the left-hand side figure, which plots the productivity of the top 90% of firms relative to the bottom 20% of firms, this dichotomy or divergence or this dispersion is particularly noticeable in services and in high-tech sectors. So what this really means is that there's a number of firms that are just really zooming ahead, and then there's a mass of firms that are being left behind. A similar story of heterogeneity emerges when we zoom in on Vietnam. And here on the right-hand side figure, we're looking at process innovation. And so process innovation means improvements in managerial practices and business operations. So what we see in this figure, which is very clear, is that the extent of process innovation is much weaker in smaller firms compared to medium and larger sized enterprises in Vietnam. And it's much smaller or weaker in domestic firms compared to FDI firms or those that are integrated with global value chains. So what are some of these obstacles that are holding back firms in emerging Asia in countries like Vietnam from adopting best practices, from innovating, adopting the best technologies that are out there? Well, there's a number of, again, factors at play. There's gaps in managerial abilities, labor skills that the paper talks about, gaps in digital technologies. One such barrier is access to finance, as shown in this particular figure. When asked explicitly about what factors hold back business operations, a higher share of firms in emerging and developing Asia report financing constraints as an obstacle compared to other regions. And so limited access to finance constrains the ability of firms to adopt appropriate technologies and to use them in a manner that increases efficiency. In the paper, we use data on millions of firms in Asia as well as in Vietnam to better understand what are the drivers of productivity growth for 4 different types of firms. Those at the frontier, and these are those firms exhibiting the highest level of productivity within a sector. The next level down, which we call the top firms, middle firms, and those at the bottom. So the question we ask is, what is it that drives productivity growth for these different types of firms, both in Asia and in Vietnam? And if you can see from the chart to the right, the greenish blue denotes a positive relationship, and a red denotes a negative relationship. Our findings point to a number of factors that can help close productivity gaps in the region. First, we find that productivity growth in the frontier firms, and again, just to remind you, the frontier are the most innovative firms in the economy. Productivity growth in these firms can help close productivity gaps. It benefits firms of all types. We also find that the higher diffusion there is between knowledge diffusion or knowledge transfer there is between these frontier firms and the other firms in the economy, this pushes up productivity growth of all firms in the country. Taken together, this evidence suggests that innovation by frontier firms matters, and it matters for productivity growth, and that there is a role for the government to create an environment that is conducive to such types of innovation. Second, we find that international exposure as measured by trade and FDI linkages is associated with higher productivity growth of firms. And importantly, we find that digitalization also matters. So the more the firms digitalize or use digital tools and technologies, this is associated with higher productivity growth. Finally, we find, and this is very important for our discussion today, we find that a higher dispersion of productivity within sectors holds back for productivity growth of firms. And these findings point to the importance of structural reforms that are needed to narrow productivity gaps within countries in Asia. So to conclude, I'm just going to set up this slide here because I know these are issues that are going to be discussed in the panel discussion. But in conclusion, I just would like to say that countries and firms in Asia are at very different stages of the innovation ladder. And what this means is the set of policies that they require need to be customized to foster innovation and digitalization and boost productivity growth. So there is no one size fits all. And different policies and different approaches and different types of reforms will be more relevant for certain types of firms and certain types of countries than others. Let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Dabla Norris. You have set the scene for the discussion today, so very much appreciated. Next, we all look forward to hearing the insights from the distinguished panelists. And without further ado, we will start the discussion now. And I think we have heard from the previous presentations and including the introduction of the main themes. So I'd like to start with the first theme when we talk about taking stock of the ASEAN as an innovation powerhouse and about the small productivity rewards to the big efforts. My first question would be to Ms. Sayed. The Fund's paper, on the one hand, points out that Asia has become an innovation powerhouse. But on the other, that this coincided with a slowdown in productivity growth in the region. Since innovation is usually seen as an engine of the long-term growth, this finding is somewhat perplexing. So what was missing there?
On already. No, thank you very much for that question. And you know, it does seem perplexing, doesn't it? It does seem a puzzle that all of this, increase in patents, increase in innovation in the region does not translate into productivity growth. And I think, maybe two important factors explaining that. It is a dichotomy that is explained, we think, by two factors. And I think ERA already spelled out some of that. But first of all, despite the large surge in innovation we saw on patents, for example, the quality of innovation is not always the same, right? And improving the quality of that innovation, including patents and making them more valuable, will certainly work to induce more productivity growth. And the evidence in the paper shows that there is still significant room for that improvement. So that's the first factor explaining that dichotomy. The second one is that, and perhaps probably more important for countries like Vietnam, and ERA also spoke to the issue of not having the technological innovation diffused enough among firms. So significant differences between firms in terms of their access to innovation, their ability to profit from it, spreading it to all firms in the economy. They're great technologies, but they're being deployed by only a subset of firms. Most of them may be at the frontier. The vast majority of firms are lagging and are left behind. And the reasons for that are probably complicated and complex and need to be studied, we think, further. But they probably have something to do with, winner takes most sort of dynamics, market power, structure of intellectual property rights. But I think the most important thing to remember is that if technology is not diffused enough, of course, it just leads to not very much in the way of productivity improvements. That's what the data shows as well. So no matter the reasons for that, one has to try to address the issue of diffusion. So aggregate productivity growth would otherwise lag. And that's the finding of the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Saye. I think you make the sophisticated question really simple. And I think so we will all benefit from that. So I think from your answer, I think the two most important things we need to look into further is the quality of innovations. And the next thing is how to promote the diffusion. So my next question to Mr. Vu Quoc Huy. Vietnam's overall macroeconomic performance over the last decades has been stellar. However, in line with the findings from the IMF paper, there still are several roadblocks affecting broader use of the innovative technologies. So in your view, what are some of the Vietnam's key achievements and challenges in terms of broader use of innovative technologies?
Yes. For the last few years, Vietnam have many achievements in terms of the broader using of innovation and technology. Firstly, Vietnam built step by step innovation ecosystem, which had close connection between university, institutes, and enterprises and other relevant government agencies. So the innovation ecosystem is contributing to the, the growth of Vietnam and also the growth of the productivities. And government have some incentive policies for innovation, like the incentives for the National Innovation Center as a hub of the innovation development in Vietnam. And also I have a lot of incentive for the innovation centers in the country. And the Prime Minister and also many ministry have a lot of program to supporting the enterprises to improve the innovation system in the enterprises. And apart from the achievement, we have encountered some difficulties for using the innovation technology. The first is the lack of the special policy for the innovation. We don't have the like a sandbox mechanism for the startups, for the capital venture to invest in Vietnam. And also we lack of the high quality of the human resource. We don't have the really incentive to call to the prominent expert to Vietnam to work in the startup or in the venture capital or in the the research institute in Vietnam. And the last difficulty is the mechanism for the capital venture. We don't have the special incentive for the capital venture to set up the office and the investment projects in Vietnam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vu Quoc Huy. I think you have identified the progressive work that the government and related agencies have done, including by the National Innovation Center. But we also face the different issues, including with the lack of the special policies to incentivize the innovations and things like that. So let's come to the next theme when we talk about how to address these challenges and about breaking the innovations versus the diffusion dichotomy. And my next question to Professor Phạm Hùng Chương is that the universities play a unique role, and these are the places where research is conducted and where knowledge is transmitted. Do you see the room for universities to play a more central role as knowledge hub that can serve as innovation center with spillovers to Vietnam?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think in the recent research, they said that to create the innovation ecosystem, we have to create the platform environment for university, enterprise, government authority, and different organizations to interact and support innovation. In university, beside the traditional role as the research and teaching, training, those days, university has other additional mission. First, the university have innovate themselves. I mean, we became not only the government agent, but also just act like a business society. We have to find, to meet the new demand from the enterprise. That means we have to find the new courses, new program, new method of teaching in order to meet the requirement from the labor market. And also we have to manage ourselves in terms of cost saving, manage revenue and costs in order to be sustained, especially for the autonomous university in Vietnam, like National Economics University. We have to manage our university to be cost effective in the innovative way. The second activity that the university is going to promote is to be a kind of incubator. That means we support the staff of a student, a professor. Even in the university like the National Economics University, we have the Center for Innovation and Startup. And we will expand this activity in order to provide more real-life environment for our students, and also to support them to start up their business. And also, I think university have to be more connected with the business world. That means we have to collaborate with the enterprise to provide not only training environment, but also create the opportunity for students and also for enterprise to meet with each other. That's most of the university activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. I think the answer is terrific. And also it's very impressive to hear that the top universities in Vietnam, including the NEU, are still committed to further innovation, which is very important. So the following question is to Ms. Tuck. The World Bank has also studied these issues extensively. So do you see similar patterns elsewhere? And on the one hand, we want firms to innovate and digitalize, but on the other, we also observe technology diffusion lagging, at least partly. How do we square the circle, and what does it mean for Vietnam?
Thank you very much for this question, and thank you for the invitation to be here to discuss this truly excellent and helpful report by the IMF. And I think this is a really good time to be discussing this in Vietnam. We in the World Bank have had a firm level adoption of technology survey that looks at the levels of adoption and motivations to adopt. And what we see is that Vietnam is really lagging behind some of the countries in your neighborhood. that you would like to compete with, I believe. And just to give you a couple of numbers here, only 6.9% of firms in Vietnam make use of cloud computing. Only 1.5% of firms are using big data or AI for marketing. I'm sure this is not true of your firm, but it's true of most firms in Vietnam. And only 1.8% of firms are using additive manufacturing techniques such as 3D printing. We saw in the presentation adoption of robotic technology and manufacturing, also very low. I don't have the number with me, but also very low in Vietnam. We see that even though 26% of firms in Vietnam are using social media, only 1.7% of firms state that this is the most used methods for sales. We also observe in these data sets that actually most of the technology adoption is, it tends to be focused around Hanoi. And I think that is possibly because some of the initiatives by the government to encourage technology adoption is based out of national government initiatives, and so doesn't reach so much beyond beyond the Hanoi greater region. So we looked at why this is so low, and we talked to firms a little bit about why they are not adopting and what they told us. So one interesting point was that actually we asked firms to assess their own levels of technology adoption. And those firms, they gave themselves pretty high scores, but then we actually scored them according to what they told us about what they had adopted. They were not really scoring very well at all. And so there is a difference in perception. Firms think they're at the technology frontier, but actually they're not, they're way behind. And we believe that perhaps some greater efforts behind exposure and information sharing about the technologies that are out there and the realities of the state of technology adoption in Vietnam could be very helpful in helping firms better assess where they are situated on the technology adoption spectrum. They also told us that one reason that they were not adopting more technology is because they didn't really have demand or capacity. They were able to compete adequately within domestic or even international value chains. At the moment, they're able to compete okay without adopting these technologies. And this is possibly true at the moment, but that is not going to be the future. And so the question is, you really need to position the firms in Vietnam to think much more about the future rather than just about the current state of competition. And what we did hear from firms is that one of the most important drivers to adopt, where we found high levels of adoption, they told us that it was competition because they could see their competitors adopting new techniques and new technologies, be it in process innovation, be it in product innovation. They were doing it to compete better. And that is a lesson for the government in terms of making sure competition exists within markets, within industry, within manufacturing, within service sector in Vietnam. I think that was something important that we learned. Now, we also looked at some of the support mechanisms that have been put in place for the government to support technology adoption. And our frank assessment is that at the moment, we would perhaps characterize this as underdeveloped, underfunded, and under-coordinated. I don't want that to be a negative message because, of course, that means there is room for considerable improvement. But let me just elaborate a little bit on those three areas. we characterize it as underdeveloped, really because the support system is not offering the full set of support instruments that you can see in countries in your neighborhood, countries that are similar level of development or at levels of development that you aspire to be. And I think there's some way to go if you look at your neighbors and the kind of support instruments that they're putting in place. There are a lot of ideas out there that could perhaps help you adopt better. We talk about underfunding because most of the funding at the moment is channeled through indirect support instruments, such as tax incentives. You know, the IMF paper does mention this as a good approach, and we agree that this is an important approach, but we would like to see that expanded because in general, what we see is that it's mostly FDI that is taking advantage of those tax incentives, where SMEs are really not able to access this financing. And then finally, under coordinated, there are many government initiatives all run out of different ministries and provinces, 63 different provinces, all with their approaches, and different government national agencies also making an approach. We believe that much stronger coordination between all of these initiatives is needed to take advantage of economies of scale in the support instruments that you might have. So perhaps I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Ms. Tuck. I think you have given a lot of interesting perspectives related to the productivity and the innovation at the firm level. And I was also impressed by, because you were referring to AI, the artificial intelligence. But in Vietnamese, I also means who will do it. And so I'm seeking the perspective from the entrepreneur. So let me ask the next question under the theme of the boosting digitalization to Mr. Hoàng Nam Tiến. The telecom companies and their infrastructures are one of the pillars through which digitalization actually takes place, from communicating among users to facilitating business to business operations, and even into e-finance. So going forward, where do you see the telecom companies having the most impact in increasing digitalization in Vietnam?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Today, I think everyone will recognize that it's electricity, water, and telecommunication. It's a very basic of our life. Before the meeting, I asked the moderator and Ms. Seas, can I speak by Vietnamese? Yeah, I share with her. Most of people today is Vietnamese. Why not? I can speak by Vietnamese. It's maybe better for everyone. And she agreed. Okay, Tiến, you can speak by Vietnamese. Okay. I starting by again by Vietnamese. Tôi muốn nói thế này. Ngày hôm nay ai cũng công nhận rằng điện, nước và internet là những thứ rất cơ bản của cuộc sống. Và đặc biệt là thời gian Covid. Thời gian Covid, mọi người đều biết rằng mất nước, mất điện và đến mất mạng internet ạ. Vâng, nó đúng là kinh khủng. Bởi vì chúng ta đã bị cách ly thì đã cô đơn rồi, mà mất internet thì sẽ thành cô độc. Và khi đấy chúng tôi mới nhận ra một điều là các công ty về viễn thông đang nhận ra mình một sứ mệnh. Thực sự đây là sứ mệnh, chứ không phải là chỉ business nữa, không phải để kinh doanh nữa. Đấy là sứ mệnh kết nối con người. Và trong thời gian internet thì chúng tôi hiểu thêm một chữ nữa là kết nối yêu thương. Và sau thời gian Covid thì bọn tôi nhận ra một điều, đấy là các công ty làm viễn thông là kết nối thành công. Bởi vì chúng ta đã thay đổi được hẳn cuộc sống nhờ internet. Đối với cả các bạn sinh viên ngày hôm nay, tại sao tôi xin phép nói tiếng Việt? Bởi vì là tôi muốn là chia sẻ chủ yếu với các bạn sinh viên. Ngày hôm nay nhờ internet thì thế giới đã thực sự phẳng. Các bạn sinh viên của Đại học Kinh tế Quốc dân ngồi ở đây hoàn toàn có thể học những bài giảng hay nhất thế giới, từ những giáo sư tốt nhất thế giới và từ những trường đại học lớn nhất thế giới qua hệ thống gọi là MOOC, ví dụ như Coursera chẳng hạn. Và thực sự là một sự cạnh tranh lớn đối với các giáo sư của trường Đại học Kinh tế Quốc dân. Bởi vì bây giờ các giáo sư phải cạnh tranh với những giáo sư hàng đầu thế giới. Dạ vâng. Thì đấy là tôi nghĩ rằng đấy là cơ hội của các công ty làm về telecom. Và đấy là cách suy nghĩ của chúng tôi cũng như vậy. Tiếp đến nữa là nói đến productivity, nói đến năng suất lao động. Tôi muốn chia sẻ thế này. Năng suất lao động Việt Nam hiện nay rất thấp. Đâu đó độ khoảng 5.000 đô la Mỹ đầu người. Con số tôi không biết là có con số mới hơn từ chỗ anh Huy không, nhưng mà con số tôi có được là 5.000 đô la Mỹ đầu người. Hiện nay ở công ty chúng tôi thì năng suất lao động cao gấp độ khoảng 4 đến 5 lần năng suất lao động trung bình tại Việt Nam. Tuy nhiên trong lực lượng của công ty chúng tôi có một đội ngũ làm về phần mềm, đặc biệt làm về AI và Big Data, thì năng suất lao động của họ cao gấp 9 lần năng suất tại Việt Nam và tiệm cận với năng suất lao động trung bình trên thế giới. Tức là đâu đó độ khoảng 38 cho đến 42.000 đô la Mỹ đầu người. Có nghĩa là gì? Có nghĩa là nhờ có Internet, nhờ có thế giới thực sự phẳng, các bạn ngồi tại Hà Nội, ngồi tại Hồ Chí Minh, tại Cần Thơ, tại Đà Nẵng, tại Quy Nhơn như chúng tôi, thì các bạn hoàn toàn có thể làm việc giống như các kỹ sư đang ở Silicon Valley, đang ở Tokyo, đang ở Berlin, đang ở Singapore và các nước khác. Làm sao là nhờ điều đó? Chính là nhờ hệ thống Internet, nhờ các công ty viễn thông. Đấy là tôi nhìn thấy cái cơ hội của các công ty. Tiếp đến nữa, ngày hôm nay các công ty viễn thông đều hiểu rằng là các cuộc gọi rồi data trở nên không làm ra nhiều tiền được. Và chúng tôi hiểu ra một điều là giờ đây là AI và Big Data là thành nguồn lực, là chỗ để kiếm tiền. Thực sự là chỗ để kiếm tiền. Và bây giờ không phải chỉ chúng tôi, mà kể cả nhà nước, kể cả các doanh nghiệp đều hiểu rằng cùng với tiền bạc, cùng với con người, cùng với các ba tăng thì data, dữ liệu đã trở thành một nguồn lực chính để cạnh tranh, để phát triển. Vâng, nếu mà anh hỏi tôi thì xin phép được chia sẻ như vậy. Chắc tôi không cần briefing lại bằng tiếng Anh nữa. Dạ vâng, cảm ơn anh. Dạ. Tôi rất xin lỗi là tôi nghĩ rằng là khi mà tôi nói diễn đạt bằng tiếng Việt thì các em sinh viên sẽ dễ hiểu hơn. Dạ vâng, cảm ơn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoàng Nam Tiến. Your answer already touched the heart and mind of the students and everyone in the room today. And I think to sum up from your discussion, I think from your answer, it was clear that there was a lot of opportunities for the students and for the companies, but there is competition to the professors. And so my next question to Professor Phạm Hùng Chương is, to a large degree, the length and speed of digital inroads really depends on the human capital. So in this regard, why there has been progress, some gaps remain, and what would be the best way to close them in Vietnam, and therefore reap the full benefit of digital technologies?
Thank you for your question. In NEU, we also provide the Coursera for our professor and student. And this year we have 200 teachers enrolled in Coursera with about 800 to 500 courses. So next year we plan to increase it. So the digitalization process in NEU as the university, I think, is going very fast. It's thanks to COVID. COVID have done a lot of bad things, but one thing good is to accelerate the digitalization process in all the university. And I think in order to close gap in Vietnam, and at first I think the first thing we have to do is to renovate or to making the digitalization process in all the education system, not only in university, but also in the high school, let the children to get familiar with the digitalization technology and also the process, making them familiar with all those. And also to make all the school, university become a first place of digitalization process. And the second one is the we have to also renovate the program, teaching program curriculum to provide more, I would say, the digitalization technology for students. In NEU, from this year, we will put the requirement for students. Even you are not the tech student, but before graduating, you have to take requirement courses in R language. That means in one of those science technology, data science course. And the third is to promote the connectivity among the university and enterprise, especially for the telecompany like FTT, or for the buying, or for all those companies that using AI and big data in their activities. So that would be treating. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Ms. Tuck, the digital technologies offer great potential, but also risk creating digital gaps. What can be done to ensure their deployment doesn't translate into higher inequalities?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I want to link this question back to the response just given by Professor Chuang on the education sector. In order for everybody to participate in the future growth of Vietnam, it will be important that they develop digital skills and skills in technology. Now, we look at Vietnam's tertiary education sector today. We have 11% of the workforce has had tertiary education. It's been increasing, but increasing very slowly over time. And so if we extrapolate from past trends, the rate of increase of access to tertiary education that we've seen over the past decades and extrapolate it into the future, you will only increase to 15% by 2050. Now, by 2050, you would like to be a high-income country. And we would suggest that you need to be looking at an accelerated access to tertiary education in order to make sure that the skill sets that are needed for your future economic growth are fairly shared across the population. We also acknowledge the point that you've made, Professor Chuang, about the need for curriculum update. And we think this is particularly important because Vietnam is such a fast-growing economy. What you need in terms of skills and competencies in your workforce, it's changing very rapidly. And it means that your curriculum at all levels of education need to keep up with that. And it's a very big challenge for people like Professor Chuang, who constantly have to upgrade. Even a bigger challenge, perhaps, for example, the Vietnam National University with the University for Science and Technology. You constantly have to strive to be on the cutting edge. This will require investment in curriculum upgrades, investments in upgrades to your staff capacities, and it will be an ongoing task. You will never be finished with that task, I think, or at least not in the next 30 years. So a lot of work ahead for you folks. And then outside the education sector, I think I would just point to the need for financing for smaller firms in order to adopt technology. I had the pleasure of visiting the Saigon High Tech Park quite recently, and I met with the young people in the Innovation Hub. Fantastic ideas there, applying for patents, really innovating in order to finance their ideas. One guy I spoke to had sold his house. I felt very sorry for him because he has 5 kids. He can't access venture capital because the laws around venture capital here are quite tricky. If you are a venture capitalist and you want to invest in innovative new business and you succeed, as you hope to if you're a venture capitalist, it's very difficult to get your money out again. And so what you have is a lot of these, some of the most dynamic and the most creative firms are actually registering in Singapore rather than in Vietnam because they find it easier to raise money there. So I do think that as we think about your financial sector, it's a financial sector that will need to evolve in any case in order to deal with the challenges of being a higher income economy. But you need to also look at this venture capital side of the financial sector and see how this might be improved to provide these smaller firms with the opportunity of enjoying and participating in the future economic growth of Vietnam.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tuck. I think you, as from the perspective of the development partner for Vietnam, you also have the detailed and to the point answer on what can be done and what should be done. And I think related to that, I think the next question to Mr. Vu Quốc Huy regarding the policies and institutions in Vietnam. From your view, are the current Vietnamese institutions, policies and laws on science, technology and innovation sufficient to boost digitalization?
Okay, thank you. Vietnam have a good recognition about the importance of the innovation and digitalization for the enterprises. The government and Prime Minister have issued a lot of strategies and programs to support the digitalization and also innovation, like the national strategy for digital transformation, strategy for industrial revolution 4.0 in Vietnam. And also the Ministry of Planning and Investment have a specific program for supporting the digitalization of the enterprises. Also in investment law in Vietnam, we have some regulation on the innovation and also the digitalization for the enterprises and investment project in Vietnam. But I think the policy is not enough for, it's not sufficient to the innovation goal in Vietnam. Because in Vietnam we have 800,000 enterprises. Most of the enterprises is the small and medium enterprises. And if you want to push the productivity of Vietnam, we first push the productivity of the enterprises in Vietnam. So one ministry and even some related ministry is not enough for supporting the enterprises. We need a lot of resource. We need a lot of programs. We need a lot of the international supporting for push the digitalization to upgrading the technology of the enterprises. So I think government of Vietnam and the ministry have a lot of responsibility and tax and a lot of difficulty to be solved in the next few years to meet the demands of digitalization of enterprises. Thank you.
That's great to hear from the perspective of Mr. Vu Quốc Huy. So the next theme is about dreaming big and where should we go and what should be done. Then in this session, I think I'll ask a single question, which is common to all of the panelists, and I hear from each of you in turn. So let's imagine that we can set the policies for the next 5 to 10 years. What should be your top 1 or 2 policies recommendations to boost the innovations and digitalization. So let me invite each of the panelists to say their views on this question. And first, let me invite Professor Phạm Hồng Chương, please.
Thank you, but I think that the first answer should be Mr. Hoàng Nam Tiến. He's the one who lead the business, and I think first.
Okay. Okay. Vâng, thầy vừa bảo tôi là nói tiếng Việt được. Câu trả lời của tôi rất đơn giản là giáo dục. Tại sao thế? Với 100 triệu người dân số hiện nay, mỗi một năm có khoảng hơn 1 triệu người cần có việc làm, 18 tuổi hoặc ra trường. Thế nhưng trong số đó thì chỉ có hơn 300.000 người là có được đào tạo. Còn lại khoảng gần 700.000 người là cái phần về đào tạo rất ít. Điều đấy có nghĩa là gì? Là để nâng cao được năng suất lao động, để có thể có sức cạnh tranh lớn hơn, thì giáo dục là trở thành một việc vô cùng quan trọng. Một điều thứ hai tôi muốn chia sẻ là từ nay đến năm 2030, hàng triệu, mà tôi nói là rất nhiều triệu người, có thể có cả những người đang ngồi ở căn phòng này, là sẽ mất việc bởi vì robot. Chúng ta nhìn thấy rất rõ là tại các nhà máy sử dụng nhân công đơn giản hiện nay, lắp ráp, may mặc, giày dép, vân vân, sẽ mất việc bởi vì robot ngày càng rẻ đi. Một con robot của chúng tôi biết được là giá khoảng 350.000 đô la Mỹ và giá sẽ giảm xuống đâu đó còn 35 đến 40.000 đô la Mỹ trong những năm tới. Và vì vậy thành ra không có lý do gì người ta sẽ dùng công nhân giá rẻ nữa. Vì vậy hàng triệu, tôi nói là rất nhiều triệu người sẽ có nhu cầu đào tạo lại. Với hai lý do đấy thì nhận thấy rằng để có tương lai được thì chúng ta phải nhấn mạnh đến đào tạo. Nên nếu mà khi đến nói đến đào tạo hàng triệu người như vậy thì không có cái trường lớp nào có thể làm được. Thế làm thế nào? Tất nhiên sẽ đào tạo online trên nền tảng internet, một nền viễn thông vững mạnh, nhanh, an toàn, ổn định. Và lúc đấy những bài giảng, những giáo trình, những chương trình sẽ được chia sẻ một cách nhanh chóng. Và vì vậy thành ra tôi có ghi ở đây là we firmly believe that Vietnam will become the country of learning and the lifelong learning. Tại sao thế? Bởi vì ngày hôm nay công nghệ, kỹ thuật luôn luôn thay đổi. Ngày hôm nay học 4 năm ở trường ra không đủ nữa rồi. Chúng ta phải luôn luôn học nhiều hơn, tự học nhiều hơn, lifelong learning, để trở thành những phiên bản tốt hơn của chính bản thân mình và để tồn tại. Bởi vì chỉ 4-5 năm học sẽ không giúp chúng ta tồn tại trong tương lai nữa. Đấy là một trong những lý do mà tôi cứ nhắc đi nhắc lại là tôi rất là thích nói tiếng Việt ngày hôm nay là vì vâng, we very believe Vietnam will become learning country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoàng Nam Tiến. Very impressed about keywords about education and training, about lifelong learning, and about the country of learning. So the next is Professor Phạm Hồng Chương again. Mr. Hoàng Nam Tiến already mentioned about education. So what more can you say now?
I think I agree with Mr. Tiến. Education is the number one. Number two, I would say, is legal environment. Legal environment in Vietnam has to be enough in the way that it's making more transparent, making people more responsible for their activities, but has to be first is have to be obey the law. The law has to be number one in this country. And the second is to protect people from the failure of innovation. I think innovation is not always success. Let's say 10 people who doing the innovation, maybe only 2 or 3. 7 of them can be failed. So we have to protect or to support those people from the learning from the failure, and they have to have a second chance to do innovation again. So it's kind of think tank policies. So I do hope that in order to encourage the innovation in Vietnam, we have to encourage people to accept the failure from being innovated. Also the more transparent.
I like that very much, especially with respect to the protection of the failures, innovation, because when we talk about innovation, it also means risk, and so how to protect against the risk is very important. So, Ms. Tuck, what is your view?
Thank you. I see that you really only want the top 1 or 2 recommendations. Unfortunately, I have more than that, but I'll try and be brief. So let me first start with what I think we can do in terms of public sector support to technology diffusion. And here, I think we need to increase the resources that are available to support absorption, but also by reorienting the current expenditure that you've got in your R&D budgets. Making sure that you're strengthening institutional capacity and that you're reducing risk aversion. You could have schemes, for example, that are loan-based credit lines for SMEs to adopt new technologies. You can have schemes with matching grants. These are not currently very popular in Vietnam, but there is space for them. They've worked well in some of the neighboring countries and perhaps worthwhile looking at that. Secondly, I think important to look at the firm level and improvement of managerial capacities and capabilities. What we found in our survey was that those firms that have better educated and more exposed managers, more exposed to international markets and to international value chains, those are the firms that adopt more readily and make best use, convert new technology into productivity gains more effectively than other firms. And it comes back to tertiary education that you guys at the students at the economics university need not just to be studying micro and macro, but they also need to know how to manage firms and pitch ideas, how to raise financing for the startups that we hope you'll be creating when you graduate. So there's a broader skill set that is needed for managers than in the past. Thirdly, we need to enhance access to finance, and I've spoken already about venture capital. The financial sector needs to look more creatively at how they provide support for firms, and they need in turn to develop their own capacity in assessing the risks associated with investing in projects that are technology-based. And then finally, I want to come back to the business environment. I mentioned in my intervention that it's competition that is driving some of the firms to adopt new technologies. There is still more to be done on the business environment. We can look at the state-owned enterprises and how they function and do more work in leveling the playing field with the private sector. But we can also look at reducing the administrative barriers to setting up firms, enhancing policy predictability, and ensuring equal treatment across provinces and between the private sector and SOEs. And then very finally, investing, of course, in the tertiary sector. I think there is no way to really diffuse the technology and to promote the kind of innovation that you're looking for without very strong investments in your education sector going forwards. It will be at the heart of your economy for the next few decades.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tuck. I think the recommendation targeting the firm level support and the educations and the related policies are very important. And my personal story is that I have 2 friends. They are close to each other. and they worked on startup in the early 2000s. They quickly got rich, but after some time, they could not work with each other, and they broke up. And that is also a very important like thing to teach the people and who runs the business to be able to get committed and to be able to set out differences. That is very important. So Mr. Vu Quốc Huy, can I have your view?
Okay, I agree with the ideas of Professor Chung about the importance of the policy. I think the policy for innovation is different from the policy for other problem, because the innovation is kind of very flexible things. We have different kinds of innovation. So I think strict law and strict policy is not suitable for innovation, including for the startup, for the venture capital. So I think for the policy, we need many kinds of, the sandbox policy, which is suitable for the startup. It accept the startup to have the flexible way to develop. And I also agree with many ideas that we need a culture of accepting the risks of the business, even in the startup and even in the venture capital. So we have a policy to give the favorable condition to the venture capital to push the investment flows in Vietnam and to accept many risks of startup in Vietnam. But maybe 100 startup, we still have 1 or 2 successful startup. But the startup is very, if they success, they will have a big profit and big contribution to the growth of the economy in Vietnam. And the second thing, I think that one of the important thing is how to attract the expert to Vietnam. Many enterprises have the investment project in Vietnam, and they have demand to build R&D research in Vietnam. They need a good resource of the skill and experts in Vietnam. So in Vietnam, how to attract the prominent in Vietnam? I think in Vietnam we have many prominent experts, like in the FPT Telecom of Mr. Tien, and many people here may be other prominent experts in the future, but it's not enough. We need many experts from outside of Vietnam, many Vietnamese experts who are working in Silicon Valley, many I know. And in Vietnam, we don't have enough incentive for them to come back to Vietnam, to work in Vietnam. And like, for example, we don't have the personal income tax exemption for them to Vietnam. If we have exemption of the personal income tax in Vietnam, they don't need to pay anything for their income in Vietnam. So that's why a lot of R&D center in the world, like in the R&D center in Microsoft, they attract a lot of prominent experts in the R&D center in China and some other countries. So 2 things. First is policy, and the second thing is the attraction of the expert in Vietnam. I think that is important for me. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Vũ Quốc Huy. Very straight and focused. So finally, let me hear from Ms. Saye about the views and the top recommendations that we should take for Vietnam.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. A lot has been said already, and some of what I'll be speaking to has been already put on the table by others. But I think it's important, of course, to both continue to work on both the innovation front and the issue of technological diffusion. Both of them are necessary to make progress on productivity growth. So, you know, there are a couple of things that in the innovation sphere that could be worked more on. Carrie, Ms. Turk already spoke about the aspects of providing tax incentives, and well-designed tax incentives, well-designed and targeted R&D credits or grants and also higher public spending on basic research that can actually promote more innovation. But all of this has to be value for money. You would not be surprised to hear from the IMF that governments need to protect their revenue base and not throw it away. So if they're providing incentives, it has to be for true valuable research and valuable innovation, and designing an appropriate system to do that is critical. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to provide opportunities and measures to facilitate more experimentation on the part of SMEs in particular, more innovation, bringing innovation to the markets. And many of the basic things that make for more productive SMEs are the same things that will allow that. So leveling the playing field between them and other companies in the economy, reducing the dualism that characterizes Vietnam currently, and that gives to foreign enterprises more advantages in some spheres than SMEs, is also critical. The financing issue that Carrie also talked quite a bit is critical to be able to facilitate more experimentation, more creativity on the part of SMEs. And competition, making markets more competitive is critical as well. So those are aspects that can help with more innovation, not just on the frontier, on the part of frontier firms, but also on those firms that lower on the rank of innovation to this point, and where we think there's a significant potential as well. And on the diffusion side, of course, there will be a need to facilitate more sharing between foreign companies and local firms, which is very limited currently. And part of the reason it's limited is because there are significant trade barriers that don't foster greater integration between those two aspects of the economy in Vietnam. Streamlining foreign direct investment, also regulations, is also important to help facilitate that knowledge sharing. And the second aspect to promote more diffusion would be, of course, the improvements in the digital infrastructure and the skill base of workers. It's a lot of discussion about that already in terms of what universities might be able to contribute and what other training institutions might help with to allow workers to develop those new skills that are constantly evolving and that need to be refreshed. Also to make them familiar with new technologies and the adoption of technologies. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Saye. I think you touched also about the policy designs of what we have discussed and about the diffusion of technologies regarding the connection between foreign and domestic enterprise, about the digital infrastructures, and also the skills of the workforce. Ladies and gentlemen, we have concluded the panel discussion. I'm now opening the floor for the Q&A section, and we are all invited to have comments or raise questions to these excellent panelists. Let me remind you to be very brief with the comment or question. And before you do, please kindly introduce yourself and identify the panelists that you want to address. So now the floor is open. Okay, please. Can I have the mic, please?
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. His Excellency from IMF. I'm from National University. I'm very interested in presentation from the representative from IMF, the beautiful lady here, and some maybe discussion from the panelists. From my point of view, I think our title here very clear: accelerating innovation and digitalization in Asia to boost productivity. Here we see there are three variables and one function. The main function here is the productivity improvement, and two variable here is accelerating innovation and digitalization. And the area here is in Asia. But in fact, we can see that Asia has about maybe 30 countries, but evident here, just only 10 countries and maybe 5 countries, Japan, South Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam, just only 4 countries. I think this is not enough evidence to prove, to provide an overall picture or panorama about this one. I think maybe you can add some information for this, the first one. The second one, I think that innovation is comprehensive and very in-depth concept, not just only based on the number of patents and just the number of policy, but also based on the maybe culture of innovation. Culture of innovation in Vietnam differ from culture innovation in South Korea and in Japan. So we cannot make them maybe nearly the same. Okay, we cannot consider the same. So we try to maybe in-depth analyze the culture of innovation to make comparison again. Okay, so the second one. But now we can, based on some evidence, we can recognize that Thailand maybe go ahead of Vietnam in innovation, but left behind Vietnam in maybe digitalization. Vietnam go ahead Thailand, but under Japan and South Korea, that's when we made it standing in between. But now we can see that the policy recommendation here, we just not only based on the innovation. I think it's very important. But I think the first one, innovation is the first priority. The second one, maybe Vietnam is maybe digitalization better than Thailand. So now maybe digitalization is the second. Okay, the first one, I think maybe try to combine between the innovation and digitalization, and innovation in digitalization, and digitalization in innovation. So I think this maybe can provide a maybe comprehensive policy for Vietnam for a far future. And for maybe I can suggest that for innovation, maybe in Asian countries generally and in Vietnam particularly. But I think in Vietnam, the first one for innovation is try to improve the culture value of innovation. But for digitalization, we try to change the educating the digitalization, but maybe change the culture of innovation. We're not based on maybe high power distance, but maybe lower distance, provide the individualism and try to maybe provide some short-term orientation better than long-term. Long-term is not enough. Short-term might be better. So I think you can should provide some evidence, more evidence. I think we can improve these reports, not only for Vietnam, maybe as a specific case, but for other countries in Asia as a general. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Happy New Year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to Professor Lang for his comment. I think most of the comments will be concerning the discussion by the IMF. But before I come back to the panelists, let me invite the other comments or questions from the floor. Yeah. Okay, the ladies in over there, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Linh. I'm a reporter from Vietnam Television. And thank you so much for all the insightful thoughts you have shared today, all the speakers. I want to ask more detail about Vietnam. And I have 2 questions, if possible. The first one is for Ms. Antoinette M. Seah. What are the advantages of Vietnam in terms of attracting the foreign investment or foreign fund to proceed the digital transformation? And the other question is for Ms. Caroline Talk. We know that the resource is limited. So which industries or fields should Vietnam prioritize when it comes to digitalization? Thank you so much.
Okay, so I think we are about to have the time up. So please let us now return to the panelists, and let me invite Mr. first with the last question from the journalist from VTV, and after that we come back to Ms. Sayer and the other panelists.
Well, I'm not going to suggest the sectors that need to be prioritized. I think actually the digitalization can serve many of your sectors well, both in the service sector and in the manufacturing sector, also in agriculture. You can see that in agriculture at the moment, only 7.1% of firms are using precision agriculture. So I wouldn't want to give a sense of limiting digitalization to any particular sector. I mean, I think a very good starting point would be further digitalization of the government and the public sector. A lot of government processes have been digitalized over the last 5 to 10 years. There is still far more work to be done on the government side, and that can in turn cut down the burden for both citizens and the private sector seeking to engage in economic activities. If these processes are made more efficient, there can be quite considerable efficiency gains to the economy. But I wouldn't want to really start limiting. I think agriculture has to look at adoption of digital technologies. I think that the service sector, which is going to be an important part of Vietnam's future, need to look very carefully at productivity enhancing investments. And I think also the manufacturing sector, of course, much of the technology in the manufacturing sector is entering Vietnam via FDI. And there the question for Vietnam is how to take this technology that is being introduced to your country, building on it and reintroducing it into your own firms as well, and making it your own, and really kind of taking it to the next level as sort of Vietnam-driven innovation. So I'm not going to pick winners in terms of sectors for you, I'm afraid, but I do think this is a very important area.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tuck, for answering the question, and then you end also with another question for Vietnam. So please let us now turn to Ms. Sayer for the answer to the first question by the journalist.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. And if I understood it correctly, it was about what makes Vietnam more attractive or most attractive for FDI seeking to innovate. And I think the first thing to say, of course, is Vietnam's history of very good macroeconomic management is highly recognized by foreign investors, and is a source of significant attraction. The robust growth that has resulted from that very good macro management in the past, of course, is very attractive to investors. They are also, of course, attracted by the very favorable conditions under which they can operate in these special zones that they could benefit from. And obviously that helps them in reducing the cost of their investments, tax incentives that facilitate decision-making on investments and gives them a higher return. So quite a bit on the macro front, and on the taxation side, on the regulatory environment in which they operate, that they find interesting and as a basis for investing in Vietnam.
Thank you very much. So we have only a few minutes left.
Chúng ta sẽ còn lại một vài phút nữa, và chúng tôi xin được dành cái cơ hội cho các sinh viên của Trường Đại học Kinh tế Quốc dân đặt câu hỏi với các vị chuyên gia ngồi ở trên bàn trên này. Vâng, không biết là có bạn sinh viên nào muốn đặt câu hỏi hay không ạ?
Okay, the lady at the back, please.
Vâng, xin mời. Bạn sinh viên ngồi ở phía bên dưới.
Hello everyone, my name is Duke.
Vâng không, bạn trai.
First year student
chào mọi
at
người, tôi là
NU,
Đức, tôi là sinh viên năm nhất của Trường Đại học Kinh tế Quốc dân. Tôi xin được đặt một câu hỏi.
Here. One of the challenges that deters innovation in developing in Asia is workforce education, was below the average of all the factors. With most of the audience here are students, some are freshmen, some are final year students, and I have this question. What should students do, learn, and adopt from other nations to boost the productivity into our study or work? And is there any tools or methods to track our productivity? Are we productive or not?
Thank you for the question. Who do you want to address the question to?
I think I want to send this question to Professor Phạm Hồng Chương.
Okay, Professor Chương, the opportunity is yours, please.
I would think that the question should be answered by you, not by me. That means you have to decide yourself what to study, which study, because I think the decision has to be made by you based on your capability, based on your what do you want from your life. But from the university point of view, we will provide the best learning environment and best startup environment. Decision is yours. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chương. Ladies and gentlemen, I would love to continue the conversation, but unfortunately, I have a tough job of keeping the time. So we have concluded the discussion today, and I trust we have all learned a lot from the panelists. And please join me in a big round of applause for the panelists. Thank you very much for your contribution. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm now having the privilege of having some closing remarks, and this is very challenging given the very informative session we had today. So let me pick out a very few points from the discussion we had. First, productivity growth has been a challenge even before the pandemic, and the pandemic just make it a bigger issue for us, and so not any single one of us, but for every one of us. And the second thing is that the innovation and digitalization is not only a way out of COVID, but it also helped reinvigorating the productivity growth, especially for the aspect of the technology diffusion. So, and the third thing is that we heard from the different panelists, including from the Ministry of Planning Investment, the National Innovation Center, and the different stakeholders, development partners, that there has been a lot of new institutions and policies that have come to play in the past few years in Vietnam. And we have the government agencies, we have the universities, and the telecom companies have also innovated further and have actually led the process. And the next thing is about the challenges we face. We face about the policies and regulations that are not sufficiently adaptable to the digitalization and innovation context. We also face some challenges related to human capital, which we will need further work in education and training. And also the different challenges related to funding for the firms in innovations, the access to capitals and things like that. I'm not going to summarize the discussion on the recommendations. And I think on the way forward, each and every one of us should have the answer today, and we are the answers. And so maybe before I end, I also would like to thank the IMF and the National Economic University for the opportunity today. And I'm also thankful to Professor Phạm Hồng Chương, Ms. Antoinette Saye, Ms. Carrie Tuck, Mr. Hoàng Nam Tiến, and Mr. Vũ Quốc Huy for the excellent contribution today. And on the we are about to approach the Lunar New Year in Vietnam. So taking this occasion, I'd like to wish you a very happy New Year with good health, success. And I'd like to declare that the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Can I invite the speakers and the host and the important members of the NEU and every one of you in the room, please come up to the stage so that we can have a picture together. And let's have a big memory together. Please come up to the stage, everyone, please. Yeah.